Hello everybody, this is Nick Hunter today, and I'm going to talk about the new function that has been introduced in FileMaker 18. It's the while function. This function has some particularities, and the first of all, it's a brand new function. So we never saw a function like that before. And other thing that is particular for this one is the way it is articulated. It's, I think, the first of the kind of a new evolved and advanced function that we are going to see introduced into FileMaker for our benefits. The problem is when we have a new function like that is we don't have any feedback, so we don't have experience. So here where we can help you. The first thing is when I was at FileMaker, I was directly involved in the conception of this, so I will show you a way to finally understand this function in a very simple way. After this video, you will be a master in using this function. This function is not for everybody, but it could help in many ways. First thing that this function has as advantage is that it's extremely fast. I'm going to show you in the video. You can get the same result of this function using a script. You can script the same and you have exactly the same results. So you will say, okay, what's the point? Okay, first of all, building a script that is 12 to 15 lines is not that easy. Second thing, a script doesn't trigger at the same time as a calculation. This will be done within a calculation, so you have many advantages. You can trigger this function from an auto-enter calculation, which is great, or any other kind of calculation. Anywhere where you can execute a calc, you will get the result. So that means this can be used within a script or can be used within a field definition, and it's extremely fast. The thing also that this function has is it's replacing a technique that we were using before called a tail recursive custom function. And at the beginning, it was kind of a bug that a developer were using to their benefits. But at the beginning, I remember that when that started to be done in 2012, 2013, it was getting FileMaker to crash. So at that point, FileMaker reacted and said, okay, we are not going to ask the developer not to do this. We are going to fix the issue, and we are going to make it possible for developer to use that tail recursive functions without crashing the software. So that happened in FileMaker 13. This tail recursive function capabilities became more and more used, but it was still stressing FileMaker a lot. So FileMaker decided to embrace the technique that many developers were using and provide a clean answer to the problem. And then they came with this while function. So I'm going to show you in this video how fast this is compared to a script and how easy it is to build a function like that. And after that video, you'll be a master of while function. Here I'm putting the help page. So it's kind of describing a little bit what the while function is doing, but it's not doing a good job here for you, for let's say a beginner or intermediate user to understand what's going on. It's a pity because it's kind of a powerful function. So what we are going to do here with this video is to try to show you and get you to understand the feature. Something you need to know here, the help is not very understandable, so we're not going to use the help too much, but just I'm going to show you what the help is saying. So it repeats the logic while the condition is true. Then it returns the result. So it's doing something repeatedly. It repeats the logic while the condition is true. So you have the condition, you have the logic, you have the results. Okay. So this is how this thing is done. But let's forget about the help for now. And let me show you what the while function is doing. Let's say I have a date here. I'm picking the date, let's say date in the future. I'm picking the 25th of March. I want the while function to get this date and then calculate 15 days after this date. So 26, 7, 8 until the 9th. So if I take, for example, I take the first, see, it said if going from the first 15 days later, that means 16. 1 plus 15, right? The current date plus 15. That's what it's doing. So we are going to play with that later. And here we have another example here where we say, okay, I want a start date, okay, and end date. So, and you see, oh, I was the first, let's say I want the 1st of March. So that's what I want. I want from March 1st to March 15th. Bam. Okay? So it calculates the dates between two dates. This is very helpful, very useful. I talked about this last year during the lean design course that we have on our website, and I engage you to see our website, go to visit our 10 hours of training and course in FileMaker that we made last year in June. I wasn't talking about the while function, but I was talking about this feature, about the range of dates and stuff like that. So how you can use this technique here with the range of dates. So you see that it's very helpful. So let's have a look about what's going on here. So let's go here. So what's going on here? So this is this guy here, okay? So this results. So this is what the while function is looking like. So first, you see here the while function, you have the initial variable, the condition, the logic, and the results. Initial variable is very important to understand what that means. And it means something really, really specific. Initial variable, initial. This is the key to understand how this function works. Initial variable. It's the variable of the start. It starts with this variable. So now I need to explain what variables mean, because in FileMaker, variable can have two meanings. The first meaning is a FileMaker variable. You know the variable we have with the $, or $sign? You know, $sign, you have a variable. So this is what we call FileMaker variable, okay? So we have it in our dictionary, in the FileMaker semantic, we have a proper attribution for the word variable, okay? But also, in the computer field, variable is the generic word for something that can change. It's a variable, it's variable, it's changing, it's volatile, it's not fixed. It's the opposite of a constant. A constant is this. This is a constant. When you put something between quotes, we call that a constant. A variable is something that can change. It's the opposite of constant. And it's very important to know that here, FileMaker is using this terminology variable not to indicate FileMaker variable like with $sign, but variable in the generic meaning. It's not a FileMaker meaning. So we have the initial variable. We have the condition. So the condition is, remember what the help was saying, is doing the logic, is doing the calculation while the condition is true, right? Then you have the logic, and then you have the result. And this is a constant with FileMaker. Each time that you have a function and you have brackets, brackets mean you can add multiple values separated by semicolon. So you can add multiple values into the statement here. In the initial variable, because I have the bracket, I can put many, right? Condition, I cannot do that. Condition, I don't have the brackets. Logic, I can do that. I can put many, right? Logic, and separated with a semicolon. And then I have the result. I cannot have multiple results, which makes sense. Then I cannot have multiple conditions, and I cannot have multiple results. That makes sense. Now I can have multiple variables, and I can have multiple logics, okay? So now that we have this, I want to point out that this is extremely similar to another technique we were using with FileMaker we call the scripts, okay? So what does it mean? Before to do that, we were using scripts. And when FileMaker thought about this while function, they wanted to mimic what script was doing. So what the while is doing what scripts are doing. Let me show. This is a script that we use, right? So you have the initial variable, you have the logic, the condition, right? And the results. See here we have the while, so I put here as a comment, the while function is the same as this script. The same. Let me show you. I remove this result here. And I use the while function to do that. I want 10 days after March 1st. Bam, I have it. Okay? That's the while function. Now, I'm using the script. I have 10 days after March 1st. See, same result, that means doing the same thing. And it is doing the same thing. So since FileMaker started with the script as starting point to create and imagine the while function, I wanted to start with the script to show you what the script's doing. So what the script's doing here? The script's doing this. I set the variable date, which in the while function is here. See, gDate. I'm setting the variable max count. I'm setting the variable counter with nothing. It's not important here, but you will see later that it is important. And the result, I'm setting the initial variable for date, initial variable for max count, initial variable for counter, and initial variable for results. So I'm putting that exactly like it is here in my while function. Then there's one difference between the script and the while function is how you stop the loop, because this is a while function is kind of a loop. It's doing exactly what this is doing. Is going the loop. It says a counter. So if you look this here, so you have the counter 1. I have all my variable, max count 10, date, the first date, March 1st, right? Counter number 1, and then I have the result. So what the result is March 2nd. Now, it goes the loop, it goes again. So now my counter is 2, because I said counter, whatever in counter, and I add 1. Then I have the result, which is result is the whatever in the result, and add the date plus the counter and add a Claris return. That means what this is doing is taking whatever inside this results variable and add the date plus the counter 2. That means here that he added number 3. That's why I did it. So now if I say, okay, now my counter is 3. What will be the result? It will be whatever inside this 2 thingy, whatever this, right, those 2, take the date, March 1st, and add 3, which will be March 4th, right? So let's see if that's okay. March 4th, and then continue. You have now 4 days. The counter is 4. So this one will take whatever inside this, all of this, and you will add on top of this the date, March 1st, plus 4, which means March 5th. So let's see, March 5th. And then it go again and again and again and again until 10. So normally we are going to stop at 10. Now, why we stop? It will stop because the max count here, asks for 10. So the max count was 10, right? The counter reached 10. So what happened? Now we are here. It will exit the loop because it's done. Counter equal max count. So let's see now what's going on in my calculation. So that was the script. See, the script was very easy to understand, right? Now, what my calculation doing? So let's bring the script here right quick. What the while is doing here. First, you establish your variable. In a calculation like this, you don't need to put variable like this. You don't need to create FileMaker variable. This is okay. You don't need to put the $sign. You just name and you put equal. You name something, you put equal, and you say what it is. For example, date is the field gDate. This is the field gDate. The max count here. The counter is empty and result is empty. This is my initial variable. I'm starting with those variables. This is where I'm starting. And then whatever I put here, I can reuse in condition, in logic, and results. But in the while function, if you didn't create the variable, the initial variable, there's no way you will be able to use it here. You need to declare that the word we use. You need to declare your initial variables before. So you need to first put everything you need here. Even though it's empty, you need to add this in the initial variable. You need to have counter even if the counter is empty. Otherwise, there's no way you can put anything here. You can't create a variable in the middle and you can't add anything here. You need to declare all your variables first. That's clear, okay? And you will see that what we can do. So now the difference between the scripts here, which is in the, so we have the same thing here and here. Now the condition is different. Why? The condition is before the logic, and here the condition is after the logic. This is the logic, and the condition is here, is after. Here the condition is before. And you can see here, there's a slight difference between the condition here and the condition in the script. Why? I explain. The while function will continue to run the logic again and again until this is true. Until this is true, it will continue to run the logic. The script will run the logic until you reach a point. It's not while the logic is true, it's when you met the condition, right? So here, until counter is less than max count, you run it. Here is when something happened, stop it. Here is run it until, and this is stop it when. You see the difference here? Run it until, and here is stop when. It's the opposite. So that's why here it's the opposite. If I put equal here, it doesn't work anymore because it doesn't know, it say what is condition. You said, you tell me to run, can understand, right? You need a logic that fits this particularity of the condition will run the logic until the logic is true. So as this is true, this run. That means when the counter reaches the max count, it stops because it's no longer less than. Here, it will stop when this is met, right? So when the counter reached max count, it's the opposite. This is very important. This is until this is true, and this is exit loop if. This is do it until this. You know what I mean? And this is my logic. So the logic, you need to understand was something here. Here I have the counter. The counter is part of my logic. I have the counter, it's a variable, say, okay, take the counter and add 1. So each time the loop comes, it takes whatever in counter is adding 1 in the counter. That means the first loop will say 1, because 0 plus 1 equals 1. And then the second one, it will say, okay, 1 plus 1. The third one will be 2 plus 1, etc., etc., etc. Okay? This is how it works. Here is exactly the same thing. The logic will run this and will keep adding it like this is doing. It will keep adding the counter, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. And then here, you must define the result inside your logic. So you will say, Nick, why are you doing this? Why are you defining the result as nothing here? Then you define again the result in the logic, and then you define again the result at the end. Here, you don't define anything. Here, you get it. You get whatever the result is. So you start with the result empty, and I will show you why in a minute, why that is important. First of all, remember what I said. You need to have all of those variables declared in this variable section if you want to use them later. So I want the result of the loop. Imagine that looping here, right? I want to recreate what this is doing. I want the result for each iteracy, for each loop. I want the result to be whatever in the result and the date plus the counter and a Claris return. So exactly what I'm saying here. Define the variable result, whatever is already in the variable result, and add the date plus the counter. So what it's doing is counting 1. The first loop will count 1, and the result will be whatever in the results, and the date plus the counter. So date, it takes March 1st, and then he add the counter, which is 1 for the first time, and then he said, okay, now it's March 2nd. And then he put a Claris return at the end here. Then he says, whatever in the result, make the counter plus 1, we mean 2, take whatever the result, that means this, take this date, that means the March 1st, and add 2, which means now it's March 3. It's doing exactly what this is doing, exactly the same thing. And then when I'm done, so when this is no longer valid, right, that means the counter is more than the max count, right? Or in that case, if the counter equal the max count, because if the counter reached the point of being as the max count, is no longer less. So this is no longer valid, then it will stop the loop. And then when the loop stops, I want whatever you have on the result, give it to me, right? So I repeat once again what it's doing. I'm defining all my variables, what the date, the input of the date, the input of the max count. I define the counter to 0. I define the result to empty. Then I'm saying that the condition is until the counter is less than the max count, continue to run the loop. Then you take the counter, the famous counter here, and make it increasing by 1 all the time. You can say 2 if you want. See, now it's 2. Or 3. Or 4. Right? So it's a counter. So you can do whatever you want. So you count here. You establish the count of each time this doing the loop here is looping, right? And define the result as whatever the result and the date plus the counter. So date plus the counter. That means when the counter is 1, 2, when the counter is 2, 3, you see, with a coverage return. And then give me the results. Let's play a little bit with this. First of all, sometimes, you want to include the dates you input, because here I'm starting with March 1st, but my calculation returns 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. I want 10 days, including the date I inputted in the field. So, okay, what you do, you change the variable. You remember what I told you? I told you variable is something that can change. So, first of all, I want the max count to be lower. So, I want this to be -1. So I'm not counting 10 days until the 11. I'm counting until the 10. Because now, see this counter? This is an initial variable. Initial variable means I want the counter to start with -1. That means the counter, instead of starting with 1, it will start with 0. That means the result here will be take whatever inside this date plus 0. It will start with the date you inserted inside the field. So this is how you do. You switch down one number, the max count, and where the counter starts. So here you have the result you want. And you notice that I didn't change anything. I just changed the counter. If I change the counter and I say start with 2, see? It starts with number 3. Start with 4 or 5 or 6. See? You can do whatever. You can play with your initial. That's why I'm saying this is a variable. And that is what we say initial. So it starts with this. So you declare initially that the counter is -1. So that means everything now is down. And then you say, okay, the max count this, it's -1. It's whatever in the count -1. If you remove this, you see the 11 came, right? If you add here -1, it's no longer here. Now it's consistent. 10 days from the day you create, your March 1st. So March 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10. That means 10 days. And all those adjustments, you are making that into the initial variable. This is so important. So now I'm going to show you another thing that is magical. Let's say I want to play with the result. We say, okay, what you can do with the result? Oh yeah, I want the initial result to be this. See what happened? Before, initially, my result is dates equal March 1st, 2020 plus 10, right? So this is what we have here. Let's say I'm changing this. I'm saying today for 12 days. Today, March 12 plus 12 days. I have it. So it calculated this inside the results. So I'm manipulating the result. Initially, I want the result. This initial terminology is crucial to understand the while function. You put all your stuff here. And then you say, okay, now I want to play with the final result. Oh yeah, you can play with the final result. I want whatever the result, right? And thank you all. Et voila. So I manipulated the result. That means I have the initial result is start the result with this, then add in the result whatever the result is plus all of those things here, this logic. And then at the end, okay, get me the result and add thank you all. That's exactly what is done. So now with this example, you understand what's going on here. You understand the initial variable. You understand the condition. I told you the condition. The condition is the same as the script here, but here is when it reached that point, and this is until this is true. It's the opposite. That's why they put the condition before the logic, and here you have the condition after the logic, because you exit the loop when you reach something. Here you continue to loop until something's true, right? So this is cool. You can understand what I want to do. Now I want to show you something a little bit different, and it's another calculation. This is the calculation between 2 dates. So we still have the initial variable condition. We still have the date. So the date is start date. We have the max date. It's the end date. The result empty. And you see here, I don't have a counter. Because it's no longer a number that I want to increment. I want the date between one date and another. I want a range. I want a time frame. So now I'm defining my logic quite the same until the start date, the day is started date, until this date is inferior, less than the max date, do it. Pretty much it's easy, right? When the date will reach the max date, stop it, okay? So now I take the date again. My counter here, instead of being the counter, is the date. So it's important that you are taking the same variable name of the original date. Then FileMaker can establish connection. Like, okay, each time you refer to date, you refer to that variable, which this variable is the result of this field. So each time you want to do something on the date, you need to use the same name on the terminology here, the same terminology, otherwise it won't work. So you establish the initial variable of date, then you use this variable into the condition to establish the condition. Then you use it in the logic, say, okay, the date, what's the date? The date is whatever the date in the current loop, whatever the date is plus 1 in the loop. And the result of the loop will be whatever in the result at the date of the loop. This will now not refer to this one. This date here will refer to this one because it is within the logic. This is not in the logic. So that's why you need to bring back into the logic the date that you define here. And then you have a new definition of the date. The date initially, I'm indexing here because it is very important. So initially the date is this. Now I want the date to change. In each loop, I want the date to change. The date is now the date, this, plus 1. That will be the new date. Then in another loop, you say, okay, the date, whatever the date here is, the date plus 1 before, now it becomes again plus 1. The first date plus 1 was this. Then this date becomes this, 2. Then this will become 2 plus 1, 3. Then this date becomes 3. And that will be 3 plus 1, 4. This date now becomes 4. 4 plus 1, etc., etc. So it loops. And the result, what the result is whatever in the result and the date and a carriage return. Then at the end, you want the result. And here you can play like I played before. You say, okay, I want to include the current date inside, right? So by doing -1 is no longer including 15 because I want that to be end date the 15. Or if you want to include the 15, you can keep it. But let's say I want to include the current date. I want to include March 1st. So what I'm doing is simple. I'm saying this is the initial result start with the whatever in date and carriage return. So now I have this. I added the first date
So now it's from first to 15. First to 15. If you don't want to include the 15, you remove it here. If you want to keep it, you keep it. And then you can say, okay, hello, and you want carriage return and date, right? See, hello, the date. And then you can even play after that and say, okay, result, and like we did before, carriage return and thank you. So here is how you play. It's like a rocket with multiple stages. First stage, then you drop it, right? And then you have the condition, and then you have, see? But it's important to keep the connection and to understand what you're doing here and to understand how this function works. You have the date, you define the initial date. Then you use the initial date as a condition for stopping it. Then you use again this date, right? But you redefine it. You are redefining the date in the loop. By default, initially that will be the date. Now you said you equal, so that means you are redefining the date into the loop. And then for each loop, you are getting the result that is already there from previous loops, and you are adding whatever the new date it is, plus one. And then you add the carriage return. For the next loop, you prepare for the next loop, okay? So this is very important. So I left into each script here, I left the while function that is doing the same as the script, right? And in the calculation here, I left the variation, the -1 and stuff like that. I left here in the commanded here, you have the variation of this calculation if you want to play with it, right? But here you see, I can show you here what it's doing. If I'm using the script, I have this. The script is doing the same as this one. So the script is doing this. So it returned this, and this returned this too. It's the same, If you use the calculation, it returns the same. If you use a script here, it returns the same. So this calculation here is equal to this, is the same thing. You have a reference, which is the script, right? Now you understand what the while function is doing because you understand what the script is doing because it's much more visual on the script. Even though I try my best to get you to the best representation, I think with this representation here, you understand greatly what's going on, the first interval, initial, then the condition, the logic, and the results, right? So all of this to say that this is coming from a technique we were using before, we were calling the tail recursive custom function. So what tail recursive custom function means? It means that before we could achieve the same goal, the same results, by using custom functions and having the custom function like this one, like the start date, end date, but using this custom function that call itself. For example, see, you say if the condition, if start date less or equal to end date, then takes the start date, add the carriage return, and then do it again. Call itself, call the custom function again, and do it again. So it was kind of hard to understand that this will continue to run until this is okay, right? That's why they put the condition that way, because that's what we were doing before in the tail recursive function technique, right? So pretty much if you use the custom function and you put the start date and the end date, you get the same thing. This is how we were. So I left in the file, I left the custom function I was using before the while exists, right? Then you can see the transition between this technique to the new technique with the while, right? So you can see how it was done, right? Also, what I want to add before we stop here, there's limitations. You cannot use this technique for millions and millions of records. No, you can't. You have a restriction. I think the restriction is 55,000 iteracies. After you see up, you have a question mark because you can go, if you go 25,000, it works, right? But I think if you go 50, I don't remember exactly. It's greatly depend on the C50,000. I think it's 52 or something like that. Yeah, it's 50 or 51, 51. Maybe it's 50. Yeah, so maybe 50,000. Let's try 50,001. Yeah, see, 50,000. This is the limitation. So that means you cannot create more than 50,000 values with this technique here. Otherwise, you have a question mark. Okay, this is all what I had to say today about the while function. I hope I was clear enough. I hope you understood it. And I hope you're going to use this technique because it's very cool. And that is going toward the lean design kind of a technique that I'm pushing here. I encourage you to watch our videos about how to use variables and stuff like that in FileMaker. We have plenty of videos about that. I encourage you also to visit our website and watch the 10 hours lean design course we made last year. Is 10 hours of free content where I'm exposing everything and I'm talking about everything. So it's very, very interesting. I encourage you to visit this page and watch those videos. You will learn a big deal of things. Thank you very much and have a great night.